Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm going to do an audio overlay on this video so that I can explain stuff. I'm going to get right to it. These tile that I've set up are in relationship to the design my customer wanted, and so they're kind of spot bonded. You know, the pieces that are on there currently, you'll see the little pieces of there. Just gluing them up there temporary to kind of get the idea of where I'm going to go up to. He was very specific on every aspect of the shower build. So I didn't have my leeway to do things the way I wanted. I would have rather had a larger, if you see the ledger board down there, it's probably about 6-inch cut, and I would have rather had a full piece down there, but it is what it is. Then he wanted center tile, completely center of niche, and that's what I'm doing there. I'm drawing a line so that I know exactly where my center tile is going to be. The problem that I ran into with this is that 12 by 24 is not, it's a nominal measurement that every tile manufacturer comes up with. I've literally had, you know, like 11 1/4 by 23 1/4 tile before. And in this case, it became something like that. This shower is not quite well, sorry, my bad. It's a little better than 4 foot wide. And with tile that are not quite the measurement they're supposed to be, I ended up with small gaps. You'll see later on when I'm setting the tile, small gaps that I don't prefer. I prefer my tile to basically be flush with left and right side of the wall, but there's going to be gaps there that are probably about 1/2 inch on either side, and that gap will be taken up by tile and grout and all that stuff later on, but just an explanation on that. Yeah, so as I was saying before I rudely interrupted myself, the parameters that I had to deal with my customer on this shower were very, very specific. He didn't want the tile to go all the way to the ceiling, which I prefer. He wanted everything to be so, right? There's going to be a border, what I call a border, a mosaic, a 2x2 that's on a mat in the center of the niche, and I'm going to get to that part later. This is kind of an extended video for setting tile and not the prep. The prep has already been done, obviously. All the shower pan mortar was poured, the drain was set, everything was red guarded prior to me coming on video. So this video specifically is little tricks and tips and stuff like that on how to set tile, especially tile that's not perfect. You see that brown on the back of the tile? Generally, I refer to that as glazed clay. It's a very low-end porcelain tile. I really don't even like calling it porcelain because of the makeup of the tile itself. There is a very, very thin layer of glaze that's on the top of this tile, and for that reason, you're going to see later on where some of that glaze easily chips off of the surface, and then you're relegated to doing a cut on a different tile. A really good porcelain tile will still have a glaze on it, but it'll be a better backer of the tile itself. It'll be a better makeup of the tile, and then the glaze is not so easily chipped, and this one is. So you're going to see that later on when I have to recut some tile because of the chips. It's very easy to get a chip on this tile too, which is another reason I don't like it. Anyway, going forward, I'm going to talk about a lot of different stuff, and hopefully this helps somebody. This tile is not rectified. Rectified meaning that every tile matches up to every tile, and because of that, you see those little shims that I have, those yellow shims on the right side at the bottom, because that tile doesn't quite go up and match the adjoining tile, and so that's the reason for that. Here is a center tile that I'm measuring to get exact measurement with my cut to wrap around the niche. Because that is the bottom line of where my mosaic is going to be. Mosaic, the 2x2 that I was talking about earlier, the border, if you will. And I'm going to refer to it going forward as the border. So this is the last tile that will be set before the border. And with this type of tile, that's the reason I have the 6-inch cut down at the bottom. It might even be a 4-inch cut, I forget. But in order to facilitate what my customer wanted with that border in the center of the niche, it had to be that way. The measurement that I'm doing, measure twice, cut once. Pretty well known that you don't want to have to make cuts over and over again because you got the cut wrong. In this case, I'm going to be cutting this tile and the glaze chips on the corner. You can see it on the right side once I do the back cut on this in order to get that piece off. The glaze actually chipped on the right corner. Very, very slight chip that you can barely see when I get to that, but you're going to see where I have to cut this tile again because of that chip, and that's another reason that I don't like, the low-end tile like this. This one tile probably cost $1.60, and it's a 2-foot tile, so it should be $1.60 times 2 for a better tile. In other words, $6-7 a tile would have been a much better tile than this less than $2 for 2 square feet type of tile. The back cutting on this, I think this is where I ended up chipping the glaze off. And you're going to see when I take that piece off and turn it back around. See on the bottom right, and I'm trying to square it up and get the excess piece off and all that stuff, and I'm not happy with it. Once I set it up there and make sure the cut was right, I see that little chip down there on the right side. I'm like, oh crap, I got to do this over. And there it goes. So kind of the nature of the beast, I don't prefer to do that. And one of the reasons that I was getting to earlier about talking about how this is not a true 12 by 24 or anything close to it is that that's the reason that I had to have the space between the tiles, the cut tiles. If I had not, those 12, theoretically the 12-inch pieces on the left and right there, if I had cut them to size, which would have been a little better than half of that tile, then I would have wasted a whole lot more tile trying to get those, all the way up to the 7-foot mark on all 3 walls. And that's why I ended up with the gap that you'll see later on. And these wedges and clips are very, very important to get no lippage onto your tile. For those of you that don't know about the leveling system, the clips and the wedges that I'm putting in now ensures that you don't have lippage on your tile, especially doing an offset at half, because theoretically you're not supposed to do half. You're supposed to do like a third to avoid lippage, but nobody wants a third, like stair step. They don't want that. Everybody wants it at a half. So yeah, you have to use these clips and the wedges to get that right. And you see, I think I'm going to show it here on the left side or the right side. These cut pieces, yeah, on the right side there, these cut pieces have the gap that's on the left and the right, and I don't like that. But again, nature of the beast with this type of tile, being, I think these were actually 11.5 by 23.5. And that's kind of part and parcel of the reason. If they were closer, if they were, like 11 3/4 typically, or 11 7/8 is what I typically run into, then I wouldn't have this issue so much. But it is what it is. This is the bottom part, as I said, of where my border is going to be. And that's where I kind of start leveling things out, making sure that I'm square and all that stuff. And I think I'll get my tape measure out to measure up from the ceiling to make sure that, I'm on point, even though the tile doesn't go up to the ceiling. Yep, that's where I do the measurement. So I should end up with the same measurement on both sides, even though the ceiling is not level sometimes. And that's where I find out where I have my parameter with my border, where those tile literally almost match up. Even with my thin set involved, that mosaic tile almost matches up exactly to the thickness of my field tile, which begets the problem and the solution that I come up with. So I'm basically showing the line of the top of the tile, what I'm dealing with that 6 inches. And I'll slap a ledger board on there as well, so I can run my tile above that and then retroactively set my my border tile in. You see that large gap there, right there on the right side? That's what I'm dealing with, and I don't like that. And there was no way to shorten that tile, that wall, either side of that wall, to get a better cut fitting up against the wall, except for those center pieces that you see, the longer pieces, they're basically butted on the wall. This is where I'm doing my measurement off of where my bull nose is going to be, and there's my bull nose. So I'm just kind of setting a mark so that I know where my tile goes up to with that bull nose fashion there. And because walls are not plumb and true and flush and all that stuff, I mark that bull nose piece all the way up, because my field tile may be cut differently as I go up the wall. and that's the reason that that mark needs to be there. For those of you watching setting tile for the first time, if you don't know, I'll explain a little bit. So I'm just kind of keying in all the thin set onto the wall, making sure that it's stuck to the wall well. Then I take my trowel, and that's a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch notched square trowel, and that gives me a pretty good, consistent, how would I say it? When I screed out thin set with the trowel, it's giving me ridges on there. Then when I back butter my tile, as I'm doing here, then I'm sticking the back butter of the tile straight to the ridges, and I'm compressing those so that the ridges, flatten down and that there's good adhesion to both surfaces. And that's the proper way that a tile should be set, as opposed to what I was doing earlier with the spot bonding. Spot bonding, never a good idea. Never a good idea. Creates hollow points, creates the possibility the tile falls off the wall later on, etc., etc. So this is kind of the proper way to set tile. And I usually, on a long tile like this, I'm usually doing my ridges in opposition to the length of the tile. So, I have this large piece that I'm going to cut right here, and my ridges go up rather than follow the long piece, because it's easier to collapse those ridges and get all that air out on a shorter distance, meaning that the thin set's a shorter distance on a long tile. So just by default, that's how I screed out my thin set. You're going to see me do that on the floor as well, and in addition to the back of the niche, where I basically trowel out some thin set with a smaller trowel. But I'm not doing that to collapse the ridges. I'm doing that to make sure that I have a consistent amount of thin set, so that when I set my mosaic tile, that I don't have more thin set in one area than I do in another. And so it really has nothing to do with a smaller mosaic tile with collapsing ridges than it does the consistency of the thin set. And this is where I cut individual tile to match up to where the bullnose are going to be. And I think the tile before that I had chipped the glaze as well. So I used that scrap tile that was already broken on the corner to make that happen. Yeah, so there's a lot of little, how would I say, little bits and pieces of information that I'm going to put out there. The main reason that I did this video is I wanted to show that border process, because there's a bit of an anomaly in that usually when I do a border, a mosaic border, it's usually the border material is thinner than the field tile. So what I would normally do is I would put in like 1/4 inch backer board, and it doesn't matter which backer board, and I would glue like 6 inches of that to, the wall. Then the next day I have something that has bumped out my mosaic to match up my field tile, because the field tile is thick, plus you have the thin set behind it, and usually the mosaic is thinner. In this case, my mosaic, the 2x2 square, are exactly the same size, taken from the same tile, and therefore it becomes problematic to put in 1/4 inch backer board. And I'll get to that later. So here I'm just drawing out the circle for my shower valve. And I don't show the process of cutting it. There's a lot of videos on it. It's just going to magically appear with a hole in it after this little clip right here. There's a lot of videos. There's your hole. There's a lot of videos on YouTube about how to use an angle grinder to make that circle. It's a little tedious process. It takes a while. It takes a little bit of practice sometimes with some people to do that. But yeah, I didn't show the process, unfortunately. Getting back to the mosaic thing, because I want to kind of jump ahead on the verbiage of this, because I don't really have a lot of time. This is a long video, but in order to explain things fast forward like this, I have to kind of jump ahead. So in order to facilitate the mosaic without doing the 1/4 inch bump out with the wallboard that I was talking about and gluing it to the wall, it would have bumped out too far. So I had to kind of like improvise insofar as putting the mosaic on there where it would be as flush as possible to the field tile. And of course that mosaic, because it's taken from the same cloth as the field tile, is not perfect either. So you're going to see a bunch of wedges, a bunch of those orange wedges, or sorry, the yellow wedges that you see down below. I'll be using those also. One of the problems with not having a good rectified tile, meaning that all tile match every tile out of every box, unlike this tile, is that you run into a lot of problems with spacing. You run into a lot of problems with measurements, being on point and all that stuff, because the tiles don't match each other. And because there's inconsistencies, especially in those 2x2, where the tile are too close together on the mat's like really flimsy. There's a lot of problems that result in having a lower end tile. So if you're contemplating doing a tile job yourself as a DIYer, please pick a better tile. It will make your job much, much easier in the long run. And I'll usually charge a bit more. You're going to save a few dollars on buying a lower end tile, but you're not going to save those dollars when you hire me, because I'm going to run through all these little ticks, these little problems that I run into, and I'm going to charge more. A better rectified tile, a better type of mosaic that's on a mat that's stiffer, a fiberglass mat that's stiffer, is going to get a better price from me, because I don't have all the issues that I run into with this type of tile. But yeah, once I get up to that bottom row where the mosaic is going to be, then that's a stopping point, and then I have to slap ledger board right above that, the 6-inch mark you'll see in a few minutes here. And the ledger board will facilitate running a row of tile on the top of that once I have level, which it is. And I always cross-reference my level, as I did there with my left and right side, or back to back. I always like to cross-reference, make sure all my tile is level and all that stuff. It matters, and it's going to matter more because of the border. And this is what I was talking about earlier, about how I screed out with a smaller notch trowel my thin set on the back of the niche. And it is a smaller notch trowel. And it doesn't really matter which way the lines go, because again, it's not so much about collapsing ridges as it is getting a consistent amount of thin set, so that when you push it down with your float, which I will, and I'll show that a little bit later, that you're not squishing excess thin set through those grout lines, because that becomes messy. And I got really, really, really lucky here. I had one mat of this 2x2 and then another row where I didn't have to do any cuts top and bottom with left and right, and that's a bit of an anomaly. There's my float pushing it down into the thin set really well, and there are my wedges to take up the difference for the crappy mat that's behind this tile. The mat should be stiff enough to where when you hold it, it slightly bends a little bit. When you hold it in one hand, it just wants to bend. It doesn't just fall down in your hand, or worse yet, the pieces of tile fall off of the mat. That's like worst case scenario, and I've had that quite often on floor tile, where I try and change my customer's mind about getting a better tile that makes my life easier, because otherwise I have to use a pizza pan. I don't have 3 or 4 hands to hold one of those mosaics up in 4 different directions, so I have to slide it off of a pizza pan or something like that to make it happen onto the thin set, usually on the floor. The wall's a little bit more, a little easier to deal with. Just have to use more wedges to space them out. So again, I think this is the next. Yeah, this is the next day, because I've taken my ledger boards off of the bottom. You see there that 6 inches at the bottom. I'll fill in later. But the next day, I had to Dremel out some of the hard thin set. You see, I'm kind of struggling getting those clips in there, because you can the next day Dremel out little spaces for those clips to fit in, but apparently I didn't Dremel well enough, and I'm kind of struggling with those clips. But where there's a will, there's a way. So I'm using different things. You're going to see me a little bit later when I set a tile that I'm going to use a kind of a crappy level that I have that I don't really use as a level anymore, more of a screed board. But I'll use my mallet to hit the top of that level to hit the tile, because again, I don't want to break the tile once it's set and have to redo it again, nor do I want to chip off the glaze that's on the surface. So yeah, there's where, and a piece of wood probably would have worked better if I had a little scrap piece of wood. And that's where I'm hitting with the mallet, trying to push those clips down. Whatever works for you, you just improvise where you can, every which way on tile jobs. And I do it well, every tile guy does it frequently. They have their own little tricks of the trade, so to speak. Yeah, on this right side, there's going to be a bullnose as well, but I didn't have a parameter to go by because my customer didn't want the tile to flow out of the shower. He wanted to be consistent with that other side. So the bullnose is going to be on the outside of the curb. I want a little bit more tile on the outside only because usually that sheetrock down there on the right side will get some type of water penetration, and sometimes that sheetrock is soft or ruined or moldy or whatever. So yeah, my bullnose will be setting outside of that. And there's my little spot bonding that I'm doing on my pre-cut pieces that go on the top. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that I thought that those tile were cut well. And then when I actually set the tile on the wall, I realized, it ain't gonna work, ain't gonna work. Because I slapped my tape measure on it and I realized the distance from the bottom tile to the top tile is different. So no harm and no foul making mistakes along the way. You rectify those mistakes, same as I did with that little chip tile or little glaze came off. I could have left it up there, but it just takes a little extra time to do it right. And obviously, I had extra time to make sure this one was right. Because watch this, it's kind of funny. I put both tile up there, then I start doing the measurement, and I'm like, oh crap, it's not fitting. It's not fitting to the same measurement as the bottom tile. We're trying to get, I think every tile guy really strives to get as perfect a job as possible on every job we do. I think, any respectable tile guy is ultimately trying to do that. And when it's not quite perfect, it's like, do I take that off and cut it again and take the, yes, yes. If it's not as perfect as you can get it, you do it again. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to be proud of our work. We're more critical of ourselves, trust me on this, than most of our customers are. And when it's not quite right, you're like, ooh, let me do that again. So this is where I start doing the measurement and realizing, even with the wedges that I have there where I bump it up and all that stuff, and then I start putting my clips in and put my yeah, put my tape on it, and then realize that I'm off. And it sucks. See, there I go. It's like, that's not right. That needs to be shaved off. So there I made my mark. Maybe an eighth of an inch that I have to shave, but it has to be done to get it right. Ultimately, I'm going to have bullnose on the inside of that niche, and that bullnose has to be able to sit flush up against the tile, and the tile have to be flush. And that's why I do the self-correction. And I believe I do it on the right side as well. Once I do the measurement again. You're always, always, always measuring, measuring, measuring. Yep, that's good to go. Let me check this side. 6 inches, 6 inches, 6 inches, 6 inches. Yeah, we're good. Except, I think that right side is off, and I'm going to have to redo that one again to make sure everything is level going up. One of the problems with not going to the ceiling, as I said before, you're going to see this at the end of the video. I don't like that small cut at the bottom. I really, really don't. This little 4-inch or 6-inch cut that I did have to do at the bottom. I'd rather have a full piece, as I started at the very beginning of the video. But he did not want this tile taken up to the ceiling, which again is a bit of an anomaly because it would have been better to have taken it to the ceiling so I could get a fuller piece at the bottom. There's where I shaved off on that right side to get the measurement right. And now everything is perfect as I can make it. And so I'm going to start tiling on that right side and the left side. The ledger boards are going to hold that tile up overnight, and then I'm kind of stuck until the next day when I can pull those ledger boards off and start doing the border piece. And that's, again, not to be redundant with my wordage, but that's kind of the purpose of doing this video. Some of these tricks, like doing these circular cuts around the drain, yeah, there's that, and I'm going to talk about that in a second here. But the main reason I did this video is improvising with that border. When I talked about the border tile being the same size as the field tile, I had to improvise, and that's, I think, the biggest trick that I want to show on this video, besides all these little cuts that I'm doing here. This tile is a little bit harder to deal with. I don't have my my floor tile flush up against the drain. I always since day one have raised my floor tile probably an eighth of an inch or better above the drain, and then I do little taper cuts. And the taper cuts are to ensure that there's never any pooling going around the drain, so that my tile sets, as I said, proud of the drain with the taper cut, so that all the positive water flow goes down into the drain, definitively down into the drain, doing those taper cuts. It takes a little bit longer to do taper cuts than it does if I just, cut the circular around the drain and just set it in there, right? See how fast, even on fast speed, this goes, where I can just do the circular cut and boom, I'm done. So all I have to do now is just set that tile, but I don't. I take the extra time and do the taper cut. On here, it's a little bit more difficult because of the makeup of the tile that I mentioned earlier, like this glazed clay that I'm dealing with, this brown. So I think I end up using the grout to kind of cover that brown later on, but you could get some oil-based paint and get a small brush and kind of cover that as well if you end up with this type of tile. But I don't recommend it. When I have a better porcelain tile mosaic, I don't have to worry about that brown showing around the edge of the drain. It's only showing because I'm doing this taper thing. It's a cleaner, better look. And I don't see other tile guys doing it. I think I'm the only one that does taper cuts. I haven't seen any videos where other tile guys will do these. But I just started doing it from day one. I don't want the pooling around the drain area. But you see the wedges, the little yellow wedges that I have on the floor? Yeah, that's to separate those tile that come on the mat. Sometimes they're really close to each other. So I just stick those wedges in there temporarily, as I did on the niche. And I'm going to do later on with the border tile, which is the same 2x2, to separate the tile that comes on the mat. If you start taking them off, that mat is really flimsy, and then it's kind of a Pandora's box. You start pulling one off and the other one will come off, and yeah, it's problematic. By the way, you're not going to cut your finger on this blade. You see how close my fingers are, even though I have gloves on. That tile saw blade, diamond studded type of blade, wants to cut dense object, and your fingers are not dense. You could get your finger caught up between that and the table, and that would definitely do you some damage, but the blade itself will not cut your finger. So, a lot of people will say, oh, look how close your fingers are to the blade. I have all 5 of my fingers on both hands, never had any damage, so yeah. Just to let those know that are thinking, oh, he's taking a chance. No, I do this all the time. And yeah, it takes a little bit more time to do these little tapers, but I like the look. I like the look. And at the end of the video, you're going to see, after it's grouted and all that stuff, why I do it and why it looks better. Obviously, this is the next day. I'm doing the grouting process. There's not a lot that I can tell you on this. You're pushing your grout in with your float the best you can, screening off the rest of it. You see my 6-inch blade that I'm using. I'm pushing that in. I always leave a gap of my wallboard between that and the mortar before I set my tile, so that gap has to get some grout too, because my tile is pushed inside of that gap by about ½ an inch or so. So I'm using my 6-inch blade to push grout into that gap. And I'm not really concerned about sponging off the excess on the inside of the gap because it's kind of innocuous and you'll never get your sponge in there anyway. But it's important to have that gap filled because the tile is kind of pushed up against the liner. And so between the liner and the tile itself, yeah, you put some grout in there. Some people advocate to put caulking in there. You could, and I suppose you could run some silicone inside of that gap. Maybe some matching silicone, although it wouldn't matter because the wall tile is going to overlap it. It's never dawned on me to put silicone inside of that gap that I have. I just feel that it's better to have air in there. If any moisture, it's doubtful that water would ever get in there, but if any moisture ever gets in there, I want kind of like air to evaporate any moisture, and I don't want the caulking to kind of inhibit that which I'm trying to do. So the grouting process, moves along, I kind of sponge off everything to start with, wring out my sponge the best I can, and as dry as you can, kind of go over it with all four sides. The way I do it, so there's one side, there's two side, there's three side, there's four side, rinse. One side, two side, three side, four side, rinse. So yeah, kind of at an angle too. You don't want to follow the grout lines necessarily because you might dig into the grout lines. So every fourth sweep with all four sides of that sponge, it gets a rinse again. And you don't go over it and go over it and go over it. You let it set, you let it dry up, and a little bit of the haze that you have left over the next day you can kind of wipe off, after it dries. So I think a lot of people over sponge their grout, which is not good. The more water you're adding to your grout, the weaker it becomes. So you're not really benefiting anything by over sponging your grout. Not a good idea. I use Prism by default, and I've been using Prism now, I believe, for about 7 years, 8 years. If Prism, Home Depot has cut back on how many colors they have. I think they have like half a dozen colors, so they don't have the whole chart of colors anymore. They backed off of that with Prism, but you can get it from your local tile store, or you can order it online. And I like it because I can use it on a small grout line, large grout line. I can use it on natural stone. I can use it on any application, especially like river rock where I have very large grout lines. I can use this Prism. It doesn't have the sand that is typical with sanded grout. It has silica in it, so it doesn't scratch natural stone. I can use it on marble. I can use it on granite. I can use it on any type of tile with any type of spacing. So yeah, by default. People ask me that all the time. What grout do you prefer? That's what I prefer. There are a lot of grout choices out there. Map-By is probably the most popular. Um, I don't have what works for me is what I stick to. I don't like to switch around different products and all that stuff because I don't want to take a chance on my customers and having callbacks and stuff. So here is the whole point. 3/4 of the way through the video, I get to the point of doing this video. I didn't want to do a standalone video on this trick. I might later on, if I ever run into this again. It's very rare that I have to go here. But as I mentioned earlier, the 1/4" backer board would bump it out by the time I put thin set and the tile on there. It would bump it out too far past the field tile. So what I'm doing here is I'm just causing, I'm actually keying in this thin set, but I've also got a piece of tile that I've notched out, and a piece of wood would do the same thing. If I had access to a piece of wood, I would have used that instead. Tile is a little harder to deal with, but that's my parameter. So I'm just screening out the excess thin set. I'm pushing out the excess thin set that I put on the wall by virtue of this little template that I made. And that template is designed, I cut that template exactly the size of the tile and the thin set that I'm going to be setting in there later on. And then I'm screening off all the excess. So you see there's a little notch on the left and right of that little piece of tile. And then once I do that, I can, and this is one of the exceptions to the rule about back buttering. I don't back butter mosaic, but in this case I have to, because I want to make sure that both my thin set that's on the wall currently and my mosaic, which is a 2x2, will adhere to each other. So I do some slight back buttering of the pieces of the 2x2 when I stick it on here. My thin set is a little thicker than what I would normally have, because I want it a little more rigid when I put my mosaic in there. And I'm just making sure my measurement's right all the way around with that little template piece. And it's not exactly perfect, although these tile aren't perfect either, so there's that. So it's not an exact perfect thing. I think at the very end of the video you're going to see some very, very slight lippage in regard to this 2x2 matching a field tile, but it's the best I could do with what I had to work with. And it is a trick in the toolbox. I think I've used this trick maybe 3 times ever, because it was the only way to overcome the issue that I had with these tile not matching up. And here's where I back butter the mosaic pieces. Not a whole lot. I don't want it squishing through the lines for sure. And I very gently tap on it with my float as opposed to, a little harder tap on the inside of the niche. Make sure that all the pieces are going to stick properly, and then I just set them in there. And that goes all three walls. All three walls are going to get this, and here's my spacing that I want to match up the spacing to the top, because otherwise these tile will just kind of slide down and they'll be set permanent down to the bottom of that field tile. And I don't want that, so I wanted it to match the same line that I have at the top. So you see me using the little 3-inch blade. I'm just kind of pushing up the tile and pushing them in and all that stuff, trying to get them as flush and flat as possible. And then using the wedges, and it doesn't have to be wedges. It really doesn't matter what you put in there to take up the difference and all that stuff. Everything that we have around us as tile guys are used. Sometimes I use that razor knife I have sitting on the table. Sometimes I'll take out a blade, and I'll put a blade in there if I need to take up some space. So everything becomes a little tool in your toolbox eventually. This is where I put the bull nose on the inside of the niche. Once the back of the niche is done, and some people would argue the point that you should do this part first and then put the back piece second, because of the way the water runs off. You don't want it to set on the inside of there. But that bottom piece is already angled, and there's going to be grout in there, and below that it's all red guarded, so no harm, no foul. It's just the way I've been doing it for years. But yeah, the back piece goes first, and the inside pieces. If I'm doing bull nose, I always prefer to use Schluter trim, and I use Schluter. Well, I use the word Schluter by default. Other companies make the aluminum trim, the edging that I like. It makes life much easier, and I think it's a sharper look. But in this case, my customer decided he wanted bullnose, and he wanted it on the inside. I usually use bullnose picture frame the niche, so the bullnose will be on the outside, and then I wrap my tile around it, and it just, to me, is kind of a sharper look, and that was offered, and he declined. He said he wanted the bull nose and the nose part specifically on the outside of the niche. And I'm like, okay, you're the boss. That top piece is flat. That bottom piece is angled outward so that water kind of runs off of it and into the shower. And then the other two pieces, left and right pieces, go in there flush with the top and the bottom. I prefer the 45 cut. In this case, it really didn't matter a whole lot. And yeah, I asked my customer, I said, do you want these 45 cut at top and bottom, all four sides? And he's like, I don't really care. I'm like, okay, cool. And that's why I'm setting them flush top and bottom. And that bottom piece is getting angled to match up the angle of my bottom piece. Once I have the cut right, then I can go ahead and butter it and get it in there. But it takes a while to get it exactly. It's one of those little things that tile guys go through. Is like, oh, we want it as perfect as possible, the same gap at the bottom as you have at the top. So I'll do a cut sometimes. I'll take 5 minutes on a cut just to get it as good as possible. Oh, also, you see the cardboard I'm standing on. So after I grouted, I spent probably about 30 minutes, like taking care of something else. I put a box fan on that bottom tile that I had grouted earlier, and then I put a piece of cardboard or sheetrock or something like that on the bottom so I can stand on it and continue my day working. And doing a little cleanup all around there. You see all those little wedges I have? That's to take up the difference of all the inconsistencies that I have to deal with, as well as the inside of the niche pieces that I have there. What else could I tell you? A lot of people ask me why I don't use a manual cutter. The intricacies of some of these jobs would preclude me from using a manual cutter. I have it at my disposal for redundant cuts that are, usually on a wall or something like that. But as a rule, I always have a wet saw. And I would rather have my DeWalt wet saw, but in a smaller environment, I was relegated to this rigid. And I don't necessarily like this rigid. It's good for small jobs, but that table has way too much movement. And recently I lost one of my wheels, so I have to order one of those wheels again in order to keep using that rigid. It's not bad. It's $300 and change, but it's not preferable to my DeWalt. This is a very, very small bathroom, as you can see, so I couldn't get my DeWalt up there. But yeah, that's the final touch of the niche, and those same bull nose will be on the outside, both left and right. I don't do bull nose on my curb. You're going to see later on where I use a piece of quartz. So going back years ago when they started making what I call contiguous curb tops, meaning a solid piece of curb top, since all tile guys know that usually the Achilles heel has to do with the left and right of your curb, where that damage occurs. Oh, let me get back to that. So this is where I'm doing the bottom tile. So I turn my tile backwards, I make my mark, I transfer that mark to the front, and then it usually fits like a glove. In this case, I had to do a little shaving in order to make it work. But yeah, I mark my line on the wall, specifically to the tile on the top, on the back. I transfer that mark to the front, and as a rule, it usually fits right in there. I think this is a 4-inch cut. That's what I was talking about earlier from the very beginning of the video. It's kind of a small cut. That's what my customer decided on, and that's what we ended up doing. And here I'm just doing a little shaving of that to make it fit better. So I will do these bottom rows after I've taken that ledger board off and I've grouted the floor tile and all that stuff. That's at a point where I do the bottom row. And generally, I'm doing the entirety of that bottom row all the way up past the curb, and then I set the curb top on. And that's the point where it fits, and then that's where I can go ahead and set that piece in. The piece to the right that's going to wrap around the curb, I think I'm doing it later on. I don't remember. Sometimes I go back and forth. Sometimes I'll do the entirety of that as I'm screening out the thin set there. I do the entirety of that, and then I put my curb top on afterward. And a lot of guys don't want to do that because they feel that they want a vertical grout line rather than a horizontal grout line. But, again, with the waterproofing we're doing on the curb nowadays, the apprehension about water getting into the curb and ruining the left and right of the curb is kind of a moot issue. It doesn't happen anymore if you're waterproofing correctly. So I don't really have any problem about setting my curb after the fact. And so this is kind of the final process of the tile setting before the grout happens. As I said, that piece and the piece to my right will go in, and then behind me the same pieces will go in, and obviously on the front I did the front part already. Those pieces have already been pre-fit and set, and then my curb top will eventually go on top of that once the curb is done. So I think I'm getting ready to measure. Yep, I'm getting ready to measure the inside part of the curb tile proper at center. I know nobody sees the inside, but it matters to me that it be, I don't know, I have this thing about, like symmetry. The symmetrical part about it matters a lot to me. Even that drain cap, I get bugged out when I see a drain cap cockeyed. So when I set my drain, I always have the drain cap setting left to right or front to back, but I don't have it like at an angle. So yeah, this piece will go in the center. I'll have the two opposing pieces left and right, whatever the difference is. It looks like to be maybe 8-9 inches left and right. The outside piece will get done. And then once that's set up relatively okay, then I put the curb top on. And the curb top is easily cut out, more easily, I'm going to say, cut outside than it is inside. Those pieces are 6 foot long, and I have a little better than 4 foot that I have to cut. So I'll usually try and pre-cut. I have a portable tile saw, a handheld tile saw, if you will, with a 4-inch blade, and I'll pre-cut as much 2 foot off of that as I can, shy of maybe an inch or so, and then I'll run it through my wet saw because I'll get a cleaner cut than I will trying to do a clean cut, a straight clean cut with my portable saw, or even an angle grinder for that matter. There's a redundancy, sorry about that, there's a redundancy here about doing the inside part of this tile. I should have edited this video better, but I'll talk through it anyway. So yeah, trying to do the curb top cut outside as much as you can is is a lot better than trying to get it in there with your tile saw, because it takes 2 people to run a 6-foot piece through a tile saw and get a straight cut. And I generally don't have 4 hands to facilitate that. And that's the reason that I already pre-cut this one outside. In fact, I totally cut this outside because I just didn't have the room in this small bathroom to run it through my tile saw. And that is a quartz piece. They have also a travertine natural stone type piece that they sell. They have a marble one that has different coloration to it, a little grayer than white, a little whiter than gray. For marble, they have a black piece, which I just recently put in last year. I didn't know they had black, but they do. And then they have this solid white piece, which usually works well with any other colors than I just mentioned. You know, gray tile that I have currently, this is really the only piece that'll kind of sort of match, or not match, but you know, be appropriate. And it doesn't look bad. Back butter, back butter, back butter, always, always, always. So you key in on top of your curb, thin set, and then you back butter the back of your curb, and you kind of wiggle it around and push it left to right and all that stuff. You know, you want good adhesion of that curb material, well, of all material for that matter. So I don't know that there's never a tile that I don't back butter except for mosaic, and the only exception to that would be in this case with what I had to do on the border. Clean up, clean up, clean up. If you don't do it now, you're going to have to do it the next day, and it's much harder the next day. But that's about it. That's how you tile a shower. As many tricks and stuff that I could tell you on this. I hope somebody got something from it. You're going to see the final here. Now, come on, come on, come on, come on. I know this video is awful long. There is the final. So not too bad. This was the old flooring that he had in there. He didn't want me to change the flooring out. Matched up the best he could with the color of the tile and all that stuff. You know, new shower valve, you know, a niche trimmed out with the bullnose, you know, the mosaics in there. See that up right there on that corner? I would have rather done a 45, but I couldn't because the nature of the beast, these bullnose tile were rather long. They were the same length as the field tile, and so I could not make the 45 happen right there, which I prefer. And the choice was given where I could have cut back and split the difference and all that stuff. But I run by all these decisions by my customer, and especially this one was really, really picky about how things were, except when it came to that. He gave me the choice. And there's the tapered cuts that I talk about so much. And so water will just generally want to go down into the drain as opposed to having the cuts flush with the drain. But yeah, all choices are run by my customer, always, 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 on every video I have. I think it's extremely rare where a customer has just given me the keys to the car and said, go for a joyride, do whatever you want. Do what you think is best, Bob. He wanted that mosaic border center of his niche, which he got. He wanted the bullnose, which I don't like doing. You know, there's kind of a little bit of lippage going on with that border. If you saw a slight lippage, but that was kind of unavoidable given the nature of the beast, like I said, with this tile and all that stuff. It's what I had to work with, and that's what I had to do. But not too shabby. Not too shabby. And that's how you tile a shower. Hope you learned something. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe and make a comment. Hey, if you enjoyed that video and you learned something, consider being a Patreon member. $5, $10, $15 a month would help me greatly produce more videos. I make nothing from YouTube at all. If you're going to call me for advice, please donate $50 for 30 minutes. My link to my PayPal and my Patreon account is down below. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell so you get immediate notifications as soon as I post videos. And thank you very much for your support.